In this video, I'm going to walk through building a small Windows Form application. This example will highlight how to use some basic controls such as the label, text box, radio buttons, and buttons. Here are some specifications. We are going to build a t-shirt ordering calculator that allows the user to enter in a number of shirts to buy, allows the user to choose between small, medium, and large shirts, allows the user to enter in a promo code for a 10% discount. The application will add 9.75% sales tax on the final order price and display the final price. So we have 5 specifications here. A general strategy to use when designing a GUI application might be as follows. Number 1, we want to design the user interface. We want to decide what set of controls we're going to use to allow the user to interact with our application and do the work of our application. After we design the user interface, we will decide which controls are going to be active or passive. Some controls on our application do not need to respond directly to user interaction. These would be passive controls. Other controls are going to be active controls. When the user interacts with them, we immediately want to do some work. So we need to decide which controls will be active, which will be passive. Once we've decided what our active controls are, we will register the appropriate events with those active controls and then implement the event handling methods. So here are our 5 specifications, and I am going to pick a form control to handle each one. To allow the user to enter in a number of shirts to buy, I'm going to use a text box. A text box control will allow the user to type in some text, but we need to also consider how to protect these inputs. So if the text box allows the user to enter in number values and letter values, we need to protect against those non-numeric inputs. To allow the user to choose between small, medium, and large, this is an option. This is where the user is choosing one from a set of options. So I'm going to use radio buttons. Radio buttons are linked checkboxes that allow the user to only select one of a set. To protect against the case where no sizes are selected, I'm going to initialize my form so that one of these radio buttons is selected by default. To allow the user to enter in a promo code, I'm going to use another text box. And I'm going to handle invalid promo codes by just ignoring them. To charge the $9.75 sales tax, I'm going to add a button to my form that when clicked, this button is going to read in the user inputs and try to calculate the cost of the shirts and display the result. And to display the final result, I will use a label control. Labels are nice controls for displaying a little bit of information. All right. So here is those controls in a sketch, in a little sketch on what our form might look like. So I have my input text box for the number of shirts. I have a set of radio buttons with one of them selected by default. I have a text box for the user to enter in a promo code, a button that's going to initiate calculating the cost to order these shirts, and I have an output label next to it. So this is just a rough plan before we get into Visual Studio. So we've designed the user interface, we've chosen the controls, and kind of decided on a layout for our form. Step 2, we need to decide which controls are active or passive. Well, now I'm going to say all of my controls are passive controls except the button. I want the user to be able to interact with these radio buttons and text boxes at their own pace. I don't need to respond to the user interactions. But when the user clicks the button, I'm going to stop and read in all of the current values and try to calculate this cost. So one active control. Step 3, register events with the active controls. Well, we only have the single button, and I'm going to register a click event handler with this button. Inside that click event handler, I'm going to do my work. And then finally, we will implement the event handler method. So here's some general steps you can consider when implementing an event handler method. Step 1, at the beginning of your event handler, you might want to consider clearing out old outputs and old error conditions. Step 2, after you've kind of you know you're on a clean new step through your event, I'm going to read in each of my input values and try to validate the input values and inform the user if there are any error conditions. And then finally, once all of the inputs are read and validated, I can do my work, display my results. So what I've done here is I've created a plan of attack before even going to the code. Now that I have my plan in place, writing the code should be a little bit easier. So here I have a new Visual Studio Windows Form application started, and I've named the project Shirt Calculator. And I'm just going to walk through step by step and add my controls to my user interface. And in my properties window, I'm going to change some of the properties of each control to kind of give it a nice, clean look. So to start things off, let's go to my form class, and I'm going to rename the form class. Let's see, I'm going to go down to my rename option, and I'm going to call this my main form. And yes, I do want to rename all of the elements in this project so that I don't break any associations. So named my main form the main form class. If I right click on my main form, I can go to view code. In the view code, this is where I will type the implementation of my event handlers. But let's focus on the design at first. Alright, we said to start things off we were going to add some text boxes. So I'm going to come down on my toolbox, grab a text box, and next to this text box I'm going to add a label. So to make a prompt for my form, I want to pair a label with a text box so the user knows what to enter in this text box. Alright, so for the label1 text property, I'm going to set this to say enter number of shirts. Alright, so we have our first text box 1, label 1 pair. Step 2, I believe we had a trio of radio buttons. So let's find the radio button control. Here it is. And I'm going to create 3 radio buttons. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to change the text property on each of these radio buttons so that they tell me which size we are going to choose. So radio button 1 will be my small, and I believe that price was $7.99. Then radio button 2, I'm going to change that text to say medium, which I believe was $9.95. Radio button 3, I'm going to choose to say large, and I believe this one was $13.50. Okay, so I have a set of 3 radio buttons. I'm going to select my first radio button, find the checked property. The checked property determines whether a radio button is selected or not. And I'm going to set that checked property from false, and I'm going to change it to true. So now I have one of my 3 radio buttons default to checked. Now we need the promo code text box. So I'm going to grab another text box, and I'm going to tie it with another label. Put this label right about here. And we will say, this label will say enter promo code. And then finally, we need a button to initiate some work to happen. I'm going to change this button's text to say calculate price. And we'll just make this button a little bit bigger. And then finally, I need an output label. So let's see what we could use for that. I will grab a label here, and I'm going to change the font of this output label to be a bit bigger. So font, size, let's change this to 16, see how that looks. That looks all right for this example. Let me tighten up my form a little bit. This is just a very basic design. I'm going for functionality over, we won't win any awards with this design, but it will be functional. Alright, to get rid of this form 1 text at the top, I'm going to single click my form, find the text property of my form, and we will change this to t-shirt calculator. There we go. So we've set up our basic user interface. So that's step 1. Step 2, we decided that we only have one active control, the button. Everything else is going to read in values. So to register an event handler for my button, a click event handler for my button, I could just double click on this button. That's fine. But the formal way to register an event for this control would be to select the control, go to the little lightning bolt in Properties window. This is where my events are. I will find the click event handler, and I'm going to call this calculate price. What I'm doing is I'm naming the method that will handle the click event on this control. I'm naming the method that will handle this event on this control, button control. When I hit enter, the click event handler was registered behind the scenes, and I've been given the shell of this method that will handle the click event. So this will be handling the click event. All right. Now we had 4 steps in our slides, or no, we had 3 steps in our slides of kind of what we might want to do in this event handler. The first thing we might want to do is clear out old output or error conditions. Second thing we might want to do is read in user inputs and validate them. And then the third thing we want to do is calculate the order price and display. So we have 3 steps here. So let's start with, I'm going to leave step 1 out for now, and we will revisit that once we know kind of what error conditions we've put in here. All right. The inputs we need to read are, we have 3 of them, so I'm going to have an A. We need to read the number of shirts. We need to read in the shirt size, and we need to read in whether there is a valid promo code. So we have 3 things we need to do. So let's just do them one at a time. To read in the number of shirts, that's an integer value. So I'm going to create a variable called shirt count that just specifies how many shirts we're going to order. To pull that value from the interface, I need to grab the text property of my TextBox 1. When the user is typing in a value into my text box, they are manipulating the text property of TextBox 1. So that's what I need to work with. So I'm going to use the try parse method to try to parse what the user typed in TextBox 1 into an integer. And that syntax would look like this. We will create a Boolean variable I will call parseOK equals int.tryparse. The string value we are trying to parse is the TextBox1 text property, and I'm going to try to parse that into my shirt count variable. All right. So this line is trying to read in the user input and convert it to an int. If that parseOK value is equal to false, this means the parse failed. This means the user did not enter in a valid number. I need to inform the user of this condition. So we need to inform the user of an error. We will say an input error. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to create a message box, messagebox.show, enter in a valid shirt count. Tell the user what's wrong. I'm going to clear out the old, I'm going to clear out what the bad input that the user entered. So I'm going to say textbox1 dot clear out the old error, and I'm going to set the focus, textbox1.focus, to this text box. What this is going to do is clear out the bad input and put the cursor back in that text box so the user can try to enter in a good value. Now, because the user entered in a bad value, there's no reason to go further. Okay, I can't calculate this price anyway, so there's no need to try to read the shirt size or the promo code. So I'm going to return. I'm going to return from this method. I have no more work that needs to be done. If we do get past this method though, then it's time to choose a shirt size. So here's how I might do that. I want to check each of my 3 radio buttons to see which one is selected and choose a cost appropriate for that. So let's create a variable to hold the cost of these shirts and initialize it to 0. All right, shirt size. I'm going to say, well, if we need to read the checked property on our radio buttons. I have radio button 1, radio button 2, radio button 3, and the checked property on these radio buttons tells me whether that button is selected or not. Checked equals true means the button is selected. So I'm going to say, well, if radio button 1 dot checked is equal to true, well, then I know the cost of my shirts is going to be equal to the shirt count, which I just got above here, times $7.99. Else, if the radio button 2 is checked, then I'm going to say, well, then my cost is going to be the shirt count times $9.95. And then finally, if the first two options are not selected, then the third must be selected. So if the third radio button is selected, my cost will be shirt count times $13.50. Okay, I hope this makes sense. We're just checking each checked property of my radio buttons one at a time until we find the radio button that's checked, and then we are calculating the cost of the shirts at this point. Okay, next input is the promo code. Well, we said if they enter in a bad promo code, we just can ignore it, but a good promo code is going to be equal to the text true blue. The promo code is entered in TextBox 2's text property. So I can say if TextBox 2's text property is equal to the string true blue, then we will just apply a discount. We'll apply a 10% discount, or another way of saying we will apply a 10% discount is we will take 90% of the cost. So I will say cost is equal to cost times 0.9. I'm only applying this discount if the TextBox 2 has a value true blue in it. If not, I'm going to do nothing. I will just take whatever cost is above. Now, because the user is entering in a text here, I'm starting to see some inputs that I might need to clear when we calculate the price again. So before I don't want to do that actually. I don't want to clear out the user input until after they've entered in a value. So forget what I just said. Let's calculate the order price and see what happens. All right, the order price needs a 9.75% tax added. So I can say, well, the cost is equal to whatever the cost is times 1.0975. So here we are adding the 9.75 tax onto the cost. And to display the result, I can just put that into the label. This is label 3. Label 3's text property shows what this label is going to output. So I'm going to say label 3 text is equal to, well, to embed a value into a string, I'm going to use the string.format method, which allows me to make a placeholder with currency formatting and insert my cost value. All right. Now we're almost done. So I think this is going to handle calculating the price. We may not have to clear out old outputs and error conditions in this example, but we'll see. But one more thing I see is when I start this form, my label 3, what should my label 3 text initially say? Well, I think it should be empty by default. So I'm going to go into my main form constructor, and after I call initialize component, if you recall, this method implements all of the changes we make in the design view. So after I implement all of these changes and set up my form, I'm going to set my label 3 text to be an empty string. All right, let's test this out and see if we missed anything. All right, so here's my form. My label 3 text is empty. Let's walk through our code here. So if I don't enter in a valid number of shirts, let's calculate the price. It's telling me to enter in a valid shirt count. Hits OK, and the cursor stays in the box. If I enter in a value, but it can't parse it into an integer, we get the warning. We hit OK, it clears out the bad input. So our protection seems to be working all right. If I enter in a fractional number of shirts, protection, the int.tryparse is protecting. So it tells us to enter a valid shirt count. Here, if I say I want 10 small shirts, calculate the price. Hey, there we go. So 10 times $7.99 with some tax added to it. Looks good. All right, let's see if we enter in a valid promo code, if we can bring that cost down a little bit. So 87.69, calculate the price, and we took off about 10%. So the promo code seems to be working. If I enter in an invalid promo code, though, it's ignored and the price is calculated. All right. If I choose medium, price goes up. Large, price goes up. Valid promo code, price goes down. That worked. Enter in a different number of shirts. This seems to be working. So I think we have a basic calculator, shirt calculator that is functioning. I don't see any errors. Some other things we may want to consider is if the user enters an invalid code, maybe we have another label that displays invalid code entered. We could change that new label to have a font color red, and so on. But I hope this example is just this serves as a basic example of how to build a simple Windows Form application.